Hello everyone, Zach here from the Carnival of Randomness on behalf of our sponsor, Upsitnik & Associates. In these unprecedented times, we reflect on our future, both in the next few weeks and months, but also the upcoming years and decades. And it's time to prepare for that future. Upsitnik & Associates has been contacted by many healthcare workers, as well as old and new clients, to prepare wills, powers of attorney, and advance directives, also called a living will. All of you need these documents. So don't say you don't have any assets to speak of, no children or other dependents. Regardless of the circumstances now, you will need a will for today and tomorrow. Al Upsitnik feels so strongly about having wills and other needed documents prepared that Upsitnik & Associates can prepare your will, power of attorney, and living will at no charge. You heard that correct. No charge until the end of 2020. No hidden fees or gimmicks. Al feels so strongly about planning for the future at this time that he is willing to assist you with your future. Trust Upsitnik & Associates, attorneys for 42 years, from the Supreme Court to Alaska and everywhere in between. You can find them online, upsitnikslaw.com, on Facebook, Upsitnik & Associates, or call them toll-free 1-866-391-3299 to prepare for your future. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Consoles and Computers, a Carnival of Randomness production. That's what we called it, right? Consoles and Computers?
Yeah, CNC. It's a little bit of an in-joke.
Yes. And I am Zach. The gamer Guru Rye herself is back.
Hello.
And in the first episode, we launched the whole series off by talking about essentially the downfall of the company of Bethesda and what they've done to the Fallout franchise. But we wanted to let you know that it's not all bad, so what we're going to do this time is take a look at one of the premier video game names, one of the premier companies, and a juggernaut and powerhouse all throughout its career, and that would be Nintendo.
Yeah, so we were gonna sort of go console to console, talk about our experiences with Nintendo, and just sort of all things that are great about it.
Yeah, and another thing would be the reason why they've been so relevant through the entire video game lifetime in the United States especially.
Yeah, definitely.
Because everybody knows, obviously, Nintendo is the video game giant, but really, it wasn't until, the 70s that they started getting into the electronic gaming thing. You know, they came in 1889 and they made playing cards.
And then had some very interesting other business ventures.
Which was your favorite, the Instant Rice or the Love Hotel?
The Love Hotel just makes me laugh so much.
Yeah. And then
Nintendo Love... You know, the thing is, it would probably be more successful now than it was back then.
I think so, especially if it was Nintendo. The Nintendo brand Love Hotel.
I would go.
I'm sure you would. Yeah, and then they did a taxi service, and then in the 60s they came out with, they started doing tabletop games and then moved to electronics when they did the beam gun back in 1970.
Yeah.
And then there was the initial console that came out. It was the Japan release only, and I didn't even know about this one, but in our research, the color TV game.
I'd heard of it. Obviously, it wasn't something I had any experience with.
Yeah, and for anybody that doesn't know anything about it, which is probably a lot of people, it was a Japanese release only. It went from 1977 to 83, and it was one of those ones you would actually plug the entire little console in and you play the game that was programmed on the console.
Yeah.
And, so it never made its way to the U.S., and I think basically petered out in 83 in Japan, but that's when they released the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, there.
Yeah.
But we here didn't get it until 2 years later in 1985.
Oh, but how sweet it was.
Well, it was. So, did you have an old NES?
No, but a friend did, and I remember actually, always wanting to go over to her house to play her Nintendo.
And that's the same for me, but I did eventually end up with an NES. But before I did, there was the one kid that had it, so you would want to go over to their house, or once more kids had it, it was the one kid that had that one game, and because he had the game, everybody had to go over to his house to play it.
Exactly.
Like that happened for the release of Super Mario 3.
Yeah, it was, I remember playing a Super Mario game on hers a lot.
Well, and I think the important thing, and to basically say why Nintendo is, or should get a lot more respect and notoriety than it already does, which I think is a lot, they brought the US or the world out of the video game slump.
Well, that's it. You sort of wonder, would video games exist as we know it without them? I don't think that they would.
No, because what was it? The video game crash we had?
Yeah, it was at the ET for Atari, I think.
Yeah.
And it just, and for other reasons too. It's not like it was that one game, but, there was just sort of oversaturation of terrible games, terrible consoles, and the whole market just sort of turned into a bubble that exploded.
Yeah, and there was nothing video game wise for a good amount of time.
Yeah, and then Nintendo, basically sort of resurrected it with a quality console, quality games, and people started to see that video games could be good again.
And just to get it out of the way early, having had an NES for so long, whoever said, "Oh, blowing into the cartridge doesn't help it play," they're lying.
Yeah. I don't care if it does or doesn't. You do it anyway.
It was I think that's part of it. It was a nostalgia thing, but
yeah.
I remember when it came out. We looked it up. It was $180 back in 1985.
Yeah, so that's $430 or so in today's money.
Yeah, so actually pretty much on par with what a new video game system is.
Yeah, or
the right around the $400 to $500 range for the next generation, the 7th or 8th generation console.
Yeah, and sold like gangbusters.
Yeah, and and literally saved video games, I think. And and there's still a lot of people that really have a fond place in their heart for the NES, and a lot of people still do a lot of playing on it.
Yeah, well, that's why they're releasing all those minis.
Yeah. And
so moving on to the Snes.
Yes, and then 1985 was a banner year for video games, and now we have moved up 6 years to 1991, and now you can see, actually, now that I think about it, the impact of the NES, because now, when they released their second generation, the Super Nintendo, they had a competitor.
Yeah, the Genesis.
The Sega Genesis was now their competitor, so not only did they revamp the video game industry, now they're bringing a lot more things into it, so yeah, there's the groundwork of the modern day video game world.
Yeah. This one I'm more familiar with. Like, I played Nintendo's, or the NES, but I never sort of had one, whereas, my brother and I used to rent a Super Nintendo almost weekly from our local video store.
I was going to say, back in the day, you could actually do that, everybody. You could go to a video store and rent an entire console.
Yeah, and console, a few games, have it for a weekend.
Yeah.
And we used to do that a lot, so, I'm more familiar with the SNES.
Alright, so what was your go-to game on that one?
Earthworm Jim a lot.
Oh, I loved Earthworm Jim.
Obviously the Mario games.
Yeah. Super Mario World was awesome.
Yeah, oh god, just so much Mario.
Oh, I mean, when you make it to the big dance, you dance with who brought you.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
And, what was it, Super Jumpman? He's been keeping Nintendo afloat for a long time.
Yes.
But and I what do you remember the best about the SNES? And I know this was big for me because having the original one, we doubled the bit rate, so we went from 8 to 16-bit.
Yeah.
So now things looked a little clearer and a little less boxy.
Yes.
So
I think just the sheer amount of games, like, there was so many games for that.
It really was, and there was some just cool titles, and that was when you really started to get into the licensing aspect, I think.
Yeah, because I think, wasn't there Ninja Turtles games for that one?
I think they were even on the original Nintendo as well.
Mm,
But again,
I just
that was, brought in by Nintendo, but I think we shouldn't just focus on that. Did you ever play the Genesis?
yeah, I've always had sort of a love-hate thing because obviously, I love the original Sonic games, the good ones.
Yeah.
But for some reason, when I was a kid, something about the movement, it would just trigger my migraines in like 5 minutes watching this little hedgehog. So like I always wanted to play and could play for very short periods, and then it was like, oh, my head hurts.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite, so I've always had this sort of love-hate thing with Genesis.
Well, and that's the same thing. I mean, I know people that had the Genesis. I think one of my cousins had a Genesis, and there was a couple games on there I really liked. Everybody likes Sonic.
Yeah.
And Golden Axe was another one of my favorites.
Yeah, it always sort of felt like Genesis was maybe... It sounds weird because Sonic is its premier sort of flagship, but maybe a little more, like, adult.
I think so, because Mario, especially lately, has done, like, the whole family kind of gaming experience.
Yeah, Nintendo's always, hedged on being very, very sort of G-rated, family-friendly, very cutesy, and then Genesis, I felt like, went a little more edgy on some of its titles.
I think so, and maybe that could have been it, but at the same time, that was probably good because now they were building up their market.
Exactly.
So, again, competition good, people. So now let's move up to Generation 3.
The N64?
The N64, that still had a competitor, the old Sega Saturn, and I'm not going to know much about the Sega Saturn because I never played it or had one.
Me neither. Did you have an N64 though?
I did, yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
I will say the one thing I was never a big fan of was that weird 3-prong controller.
Yeah, that was sort of an interesting experiment.
I mean, I can understand why they tried it, and that's another thing we should take a second here and say Nintendo's not afraid to try stuff.
No, they definitely aren't, So that one released in 96, and it was actually pretty cheap. It was cheaper, than some of the earlier consoles.
It was. I think because now Nintendo realized that they had a really good market plus a competitor, so they had to keep things, a lot more competitive and cheaper.
Yeah, that probably also explains why it didn't necessarily sell that well at all.
Not in comparison. But now, if you remember, was Sega Saturn a cartridge or a disc?
I believe it was disc-based.
Okay, so maybe that's another reason, it didn't sell well, because the CD games, or the DVD-ROM games, were now becoming a thing.
Yeah, and I think it may have just also kind of been... I don't know, it was sort of an awkward period where, things were sort of starting to turn to disc, and people were still holding on to some of their old consoles, and then there was new stuff coming out, and...
Right.
I remember Nintendo 64 being around, but nobody I knew sort of had one, and I don't know, it just sort of felt like something that was advertised that nobody really actually wanted that much.
Well, I had it. It's probably still in the closet at my mom's house somewhere.
Yeah.
But I remember there was a few games I really liked. I was a big fan of Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah, that's true.
Actually, the Bond game, I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it was kind of fun looking back now.
Goldeneye?
Yeah, Goldeneye. And,
that's become a cult thing.
Yeah, and, because you could have the local party, you could plug in 2 controllers again and sit there and play alongside one another.
Yeah.
But, so I was still sticking with Nintendo by this point.
Mm.
And, however, this next jump in console generation with more competitors is where I kind of broke away from Nintendo for a while.
Yeah.
So now we go to 2001 when the Gamecube came out.
Yeah.
And the Gamecube, they were the ones that had the little mini discs, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they did. It was again, sort of an interesting experiment in design factor, the square.
Yeah. And, well, it's an efficient space.
It was a cube.
Yes. But now we have 3 competitors.
Yeah.
We have the Dreamcast.
Oh, God.
That's, they tried, but... And then incoming is Sony with the PS2.
And Xbox.
And Microsoft coming in with the Xbox. And I'll tell you why I made the switch to the Xbox.
Why is that?
I was actually getting ready to go to college, and I was going and I wanted to get a video game system. And I was looking around, and I was in, I think, probably a Best Buy, and I walked past the video game section, and, you're walking up and down the aisles, and there's green for the Xbox, and it's like, what is this? Halo Combat Evolved Game of the Year?
Ah, yes, it was Halo that got you.
Halo got me, and actually, since then, I've stuck with Xbox. I did, move into the PS realm briefly, but I don't really play that anymore.
Yeah.
But, in any event, did you ever play anything on the GameCube?
I didn't. This was sort of a period for me where I'd moved to PCs, and PC gaming.
Yeah, I was going to say, you had a long love affair with the PC gaming.
So I'd sort of stopped, playing any sort of consoles for a little while.
Yeah. And honestly, thinking back to it, I really don't know if I knew anybody that had a GameCube.
It's become sort of, again, really popular, years later. They're sort of a cult thing. I think people like to hack them,
Yeah, and, I mean, it didn't sell real well. It was just over 21 million over the world.
Yeah.
But that's not real good.
No, it really wasn't. It was... it just sort of feels like it was maybe underappreciated at the time, or people just weren't into sort of how it looked or anything, and I think it sort of struggled to compete with the PlayStation and the Xbox, which at least had more solid identities.
Exactly. So Nintendo still had that
sort of experimental thing. They were trying to sort of figure out,
Yeah, who they were.
Yeah.
And then, but now, and I think really the GameCube was like that kind of forgotten console.
It really was,
because everybody was so focused on the PlayStation and the Xbox, but weirdly they were still kind of supporting the GameCube until 2007.
One of the, the great things about Nintendo that most people probably don't know, because there's no reason to know this unless you look at it, but they support their consoles for sometimes 20 plus years.
Yeah.
With tech support and updates and stuff.
Exactly, and it's funny you say that. Going to the next generation consoles when we really see that, because in 2006, here comes the Wii.
The Wii.
And by this point, Sega had dropped out of the race. They were gone, and I think focusing mainly on games at this point rather than console.
Yeah.
So now we're down to Sony and Microsoft. The PS3 and the Xbox 360.
Yeah.
But in comes the Wii, and the cool thing is, like I said, 2006, they stopped officially making them in 2013, and they continued online support until 2019.
Yeah, so it was a little shorter for the Wii, just because by this point I think Nintendo had a lot going on, but if you look at some of their earlier consoles and handhelds, and we'll talk about this a little more later, but they supported the Game Boy for 23 years.
Yeah.
But
I'm just saying, the fact that up until last year you could still get stuff for the original Wii.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy.
You couldn't get anything for the PS3 at that point, or the 360.
Well, yeah, I mean, and even finding stuff for like Xbox One, I mean, even 2 years ago was difficult,
Exactly.
locally.
But did you ever play on the Wii?
I did a little bit. I actually have one upstairs. I don't know, it's not for me. I'm one of the I want to sit on the couch and game, not sort of get up and dance and flail my arms.
Yeah.
So it's just not sort of my jam.
No, and I played it a little here and there with some friends, and it was weird to be up and moving around.
Yeah, like I feel like it's fascinating sort of technologically. This is Nintendo and their interest in, pushing technology.
Yeah, and they came up with something good. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah. I've heard that, it's really actually popular with like seniors
I was just
for
going to
their.
say that a lot of seniors got into it because it's simple games to understand and basic movements, and it keeps them active and occupied.
Exactly. So I think it's sort of fascinating and almost more as like a tech demo or that kind of thing more than I sort of think of it as like a video game console.
Right, but at the same time, it still held its own as a video game console.
It did. It definitely sold really well.
Yeah, because I was looking at the numbers at the end of September 2019, which is probably when they cut servicing it. They had shipped over 101 million of the things.
Yeah, like people were really interested because it was so different.
Exactly.
I'm just not sure how many people sort of kept up with it. Like you buy the console, you play with it for a couple weeks, and then are you still playing with your Wii for 6 years down the line, the way we do with other consoles?
Some people maybe,
Yeah,
but I'm
you
not
know.
100% sure. But still, it was something that definitely upped the bar once again.
Mm.
And that's another thing we can say is regardless of how well the console itself sells, they did something to up the bar for the next generation. Don't you think?
And then, definitely. And then we come to sort of one of their first real missteps in the modern era.
Oh, the Wii U?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all right, well, let's say what it is. It was the first ever 8th generation console. I know others are on, 5 or 6, but Nintendo's been around a little longer.
Yeah.
So I don't know much about the Wii U. What was going on with it? I know it didn't sell well, and they canned it pretty early.
Yeah, I mean, the problem was that people didn't really know what it was. Like, is it a glorified controller for the Wii? Do you need a Wii to have a Wii U?
Right.
It was entirely a branding slash naming issue.
Okay.
And so people just sort of stayed away.
Right.
Yeah. Even people who had a Wii, who liked the Wii, who probably would have liked a Wii U, just nobody sort of knew what it was.
Right. And I don't even, honestly, I'm going to say this, I don't even really remember what it was. And that's kind of a shame because it only came out, less than 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it was like a self-contained thing.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I remember that now. Okay. Yeah.
But people also weren't like the sort of big controller that looked like a tablet with Joy-Cons built into it. People weren't really sure about that.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was wondering too. Is it just a fancier thing for the actual Wii? Is it, an adapter or something?
No, I mean I think you could play Wii stuff.
Well, yeah, but just looking at it from the outside, it was kind of like, well, what exactly is this?
Yeah, I think it was sort of their, like, if you look at the Wii U and obviously you look at a Switch, they look like twins almost. It's just
exactly. And I was actually just about to make a point on that.
So you could sort of see where Nintendo was sort of going, that this is sort of their switch from consoles, which had started to get so much competition that I think they wanted to set an identity that wasn't so much based on sort of competing with stuff like Xbox and PlayStation, which had become so hard.
Right, especially because look at the opponents it had in that round, PS4 and the One.
Yeah, which, were both massive.
Yeah, massive, great graphics, great everything inside for both of them. And the Wii U was basically a misstep, or was it?
I mean, the technology and I suppose the experiences they gained were useful, but, they lost a lot of money on the Wii U.
Yeah. Oh my god. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars just gone. What was it? $228 million for the year ending in March of 2014. Came after a loss of the 2012 fiscal year, $366 million and $461 million in 2011.
Yeah. They were really kind of in dire straits after the Wii U.
Yeah, and you're talking full year losses every single quarter. There was no positive quarter for them for 3 years.
No, and I think this was sort of the turning point for them, where
right.
I think they kind of accepted at this point that like they couldn't compete on a standard console. It was just, PlayStation was too huge, Xbox was too huge. They were getting a lot of console exclusives.
Yeah, and that was the thing. This is really when the console exclusive thing, I think, began.
Yeah.
In earnest. I mean, you had Mario and you had Sonic, but it wasn't like you looked at it like pitted against each other. They were just games.
Yeah. So they sort of moved away from, your standard console and got more into handhelds.
Right.
Sort of went back to handhelds, which is where I think ultimately Nintendo has always been better, you know?
Exactly. So, on that note, we're going to leave that little cliffhanger there. Why don't we go and start talking about the handhelds?
Yeah.
Beginning with... At the beginning, there was Game Boy.
Game Boy.
I'm sorry. Loved the Game Boy. Had a Game Boy. It was revolutionary.
I mean, it's amazing how popular they still are. Like, if you see a Game Boy in a store, like a consignment store, they can often be like $200 still.
Oh yeah, if it's working and in good condition, you're looking a couple $100 for a Game Boy.
Like people still love them. Aesthetically, it's just really nice. So even if you...
It's pleasing, isn't it? It's pleasing in its simplicity.
It is, and I know, again, this is something where people like to take them and put, like, Raspberry Pi in them, build little computers out of them.
Yeah, because it is just a very nice-shaped little device.
Really is. You know what looking back on it, it was terrible, but it's one of those things you kind of laugh at and love.
What's that?
All the attachments.
Oh, God, like the screen light.
Yup.
What else wasn't there like a bigger screen thing?
Oh, you could buy you could turn it into these, absolutely Frankensteinian nightmare things the size of, a small box, because you'd buy a attachment that would have a magnifying glass,
the screen magnifier, yep.
Speakers. You'd have to sort of put the little dangly bit into the battery terminal.
Yeah, and then you would have to plug it into the headphone jack.
Yeah, you always felt like MacGyver just assembling this.
Give me a rubber band, a lime, and a plate of nachos, and I will make you a damn handheld console.
Exactly, and I mean, it was terrible at the time because none of the things actually really worked better.
Yeah.
But it's such a, a time period thing. You look back on it and, nobody would tolerate that now.
Oh my god, no.
But, at the time, it's like,
seemed okay.
Yeah, it was like, I'll spend $40 on this weird, duffel bag sized attachment for my Nintendo.
Oh yeah, and plus you had, the battery carrying case that went in the little game case.
Yes.
You know, so you basically needed like a little hand truck to drag your Game Boy accessories behind you. It's portable and convenient.
Technically, it was.
Technically.
Yeah. Oh.
But
yeah. I mean, it's a pulp culture thing. It's iconic. You know, everybody knows what a Game Boy is.
Well, exactly. And here's the thing. When it came in, I mean, it really set some high standards.
It definitely did, you know, because the games were fun.
Yeah, they were fun. They were simple. The battery, I actually remember, even though it took 4 AA's,
yeah,
actually you could get a good amount of battery life out of the thing.
You definitely could, especially compared to sort of some of the competitors later on.
Gear.
Yeah,
I mean, the Game Gear was cool because it was in color, but my God, did it eat batteries.
Yeah, it was the battery eating from Batron 4.
Oh my God, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, that's so, as cool as it was to have a little colored handheld.
Yeah.
Not if you're paying like $20 an hour in batteries.
Exactly. So what was the progression? Because I actually only had the original Game Boy.
After the Game Boy...
Was the color after that?
It was the Advance after that in 2001.
Oh, okay, because I remember they made Game Boy Color at some point.
Well, yeah, that was sort of... the Color came in 98, so technically, yeah, it was part of the sort of original Game Boy family.
But that was more to compete with the Game Gear, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, see, I remember it, I just never had it because I actually didn't stay with the handheld consoles at all after the Game Boy.
And then sort of the first really kind of new handheld that they made after was the Advance.
Mm-hmm. Did you have an Advance?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, I remember when it came out, but again, like I say, especially because it came out in 2001, right when the Xbox and stuff were coming out.
Yeah,
that was where my focus was consoles. I, was aware of what was going on in the handheld world, but never really did it.
Yeah, I mean, it sold a lot, but when you compare it to both sort of the Game Boy family, which includes the, the original Game Boy, the Game Boy Pocket and Color that came before, and then also with the DS that came after, it didn't sell that well.
The Advance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was kind of, again, this sort of in-between thing that, I'm sure it did make them money, but I'm not sure anybody really sort of goes, oh my God, a Game Boy Advance.
Right, it's not looked back with the same fondness that the Game Boy is.
No, it's sort of just a stopgap between better versions.
But that better version came out with the DS, though, right? Because isn't that when you started getting back into the handheld thing?
Yeah, so the DS came out in 2004, and, again, this is sort of Nintendo's revolutionizing the thing, because it was one of the first to have the dual screens.
I think it may have been the first. I don't, because I remember actually pausing at a Best Buy at one of the end cap displays to take a look at it, like, dude, 2 screens, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, so that was really neat. I came in with the DSi, which,
fancy.
Was sort of one of the sub-variants a couple years later.
Okay.
Which I bought and enjoyed and then gave to Hunter.
Yeah.
Play.
Do you still have that thing?
I actually do, yep. It's still fine. It plays all the games. Yes, it does.
Nice.
And that thing was abused because, it was played by a child.
Yeah, a child and her son.
Nah.
But, well, no, and that's another thing, man. That Game Boy, I'm pretty sure I may have accidentally dropped it out of my upstairs window into the yard, and it was fine.
Yeah, that's something that I think because Nintendo, understands that their market is children, they make their products quite child-friendly, which is much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely, because, unlike infrared, thinking about dust doesn't kill it.
No,
You have to put some serious work in to destroy a Nintendo, I think.
Yeah, and it sold like gangbusters, like the whole sort of Nintendo DS family.
And I think it was right around this time, the DS, that I really started to become more aware of the handheld things, because I swear for a while, everybody I saw had a DS.
Yeah, they sold 154 million of them.
That's insane numbers.
Yeah, it was the second best video gaming console behind PS2.
And it was a handheld.
Yeah.
Do you think the other places aren't trying to get into the handheld market because they know it's owned by Nintendo?
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want to try to break into there.
Yeah, me neither. Like, that would be... I mean, other things did, right? You had the PSP, the Vita...
Yeah, and I mean, they did okay, but they're not here anymore.
Yeah, the problem is they were way more expensive and, obviously not something you would ever give small children.
Right.
You're not going to give them anything that's sort of CD.
No.
Because it'll be broken within minutes.
Exactly. Unlike the cartridges on the DS.
Yeah, which are very almost
sturdy.
Indestructible.
Yeah, they're made of Lego.
Yeah.
But, so let's move up now. Their next generation, they just keep on rolling. And I think this is the cool thing. Despite them not having competition, they continue to get better.
They do. So we're up to the 3DS.
Yeah, the 3DS, which was, 2011. Now, what was because I know you played both. What was it like, the jump from the DS to the 3DS?
3DS was... I don't want to say it was a misstep, but the problem is that I think only about half of any given population can actually see the 3D effects. And for I think at least the first generation of them, you couldn't turn it off.
Yeah. And I know that was a problem because I know I couldn't see the 3D effects.
I couldn't either. So I remember playing with them in a couple of stores, and, at this point I still had my DSi, which, was still working just fine because we're only a few years later.
Right.
So it was kind of competing with itself, and while the technology was again sort of interesting, not enough people were sort of sold on 3D or could see the 3D effects.
Yeah.
Later on, you could turn them off and just play it as a straight console, but, the DSi and DS family was sort of still selling well enough that I think people didn't really feel the need to go out and spend $250 on a 3DS.
Right. And now, interestingly, we come to the exact point that we ended with the console talk.
Yeah.
Because it was the same level, the 3DS came out the same time that the Wii U came out, right? Right around there? 2011, 2012?
Yep.
So, and what was one of the final things you said before we switched to the handheld? Now they're faced with the decision. So, what was that decision? Because I know it's something that you absolutely adore.
The Switch.
The Switch.
Yeah, because, so the whole sort of period from sort of 2010 through, frankly, through sort of 2014, 15, yeah, they lost money because they lost money on the Wii U and on the 3DS.
Right. Thankfully, they still had the Wii and the DS to keep them afloat.
Yeah.
Because the Switch didn't come out until 2017.
Yeah, so it was, there was
a harrowing 6 years probably for them.
I think it really was, and some people may have seen the sort of executives took a pay cut themselves because they felt responsible for the loss of sales, which was incredible.
Yeah. I mean, you don't hear about that.
No, but that's sort of how bad it was.
Yeah, and you look at it this way, it showed that they were serious about coming back.
Yeah, so they sort of reached this point where they really had to figure something out, you know? This,
Yeah.
like, what they were doing just wasn't working.
Yeah, and so, as you can kind of tell, it looks like Nintendo might not really make any more consoles, do you think? Is there any plans to?
I don't think so. I mean, the Switch is such a sort of fascinating little piece of technology because it works as either. You can have it as a handheld, or you can put it into its base cradle and hook it up to a TV.
Yeah, and for those that don't know, the two, it looks like kind of like an ice skating rink
Yeah,
in shape, but then the two little curved parts on the end you pull out, and those work as your controller.
the Joy-Cons.
Yeah, whatever. They're your controllers. I don't
Yeah.
Joy-Cons. You can.
Yeah, so I think this is them sort of figuring out how to finally merge the two, the handhelds and the sort of more standard console, which is, I consider the two different. Sometimes they use the word console interchangeably, but to me a console is something that only sits in one place.
Yeah, that's kind of what I associate it with. As soon as you plug it in and sit it down, that's where it remains.
Exactly. You're not taking your Xbox out with you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I got an hour to kill in between classes. I might as well bring the old Xbox and catch up on some Netflix.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's sort of a fascinating thing where they can do both, and I think that's sort of where they're going to stay. I would be pretty surprised if they came out with any kind of other fixed console.
Yeah, I don't think so because honestly, they don't really need to.
No, the Switch has done such insane numbers, and
I mean,
I think sort of refound their identity.
Yeah, and this, you still technically have to call it a handheld system.
Yeah.
It was a major competitor for the Xbox and the PS4.
Yeah.
A major competitor.
Mm.
And it wasn't a console. That's the craziest part. And it was beating the hell out of other consoles in sales.
I think because, we've now reached a point where mobile gaming, is so popular and people, were still out of their homes and on the go so much, but they wanted something better than, phone apps, like
Right.
phone games.
Exactly. They wanted video games.
Yeah, just outside the house, and the Switch was sort of the first one in many years that I guess felt viable for a lot of people. Who maybe just hadn't been that interested in things like the DS family.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I was because I never really went to the DS, but I've often thought if I do want to get another console, I would get a Switch.
Yeah, so it just right technology, sort of right time. And yeah, I mean, everybody, like, you can't really say anything negative about the Switch.
All right, well, let's go into, because you are a first-hand user of it, I am not. When did you guys get yours? If you remember.
Probably a year or so ago, year two.
All right, so, and don't forget, with it coming out in 2017, it's still, relatively new.
Yeah.
What were the thoughts on it when you first played it?
I thought it was really awesome. Like, it was really cool being able to unplug the Joy-Cons from it, and you set up basically just the screen, because it's got a little stand on it.
Yeah.
And, like, it was really weird for me, coming in as someone who'd played on, all-in-one handhelds or always had a controller, to just have the two little Joy-Cons in either hand.
How big is the screen? I don't even actually know.
I'm not sure of its exact dimensions. It's
ballpark.
I'd say probably, I think, maybe 5 or 6 inches.
That's a pretty good sized screen.
It's fine. Like, it's not something you're gonna obviously put like 6 feet away from you.
No,
the idea,
but I mean, it's something where you could set the device itself down and play with the controllers and be comfortable.
Like, you could set it on, a coffee table and sit there and play it.
Yeah, exactly, and it wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah. So it's sort of fascinating, and then obviously you can buy a sort of empty controller where you slide the Joy-Cons onto either side, and it gives you a more standard, holding controller.
Oh, that's kind of slick. I didn't know they did that.
Yeah, yeah. So I've got one of those. So if you sort of want to play, without the kind of Wii style controllers, you can do that.
Yeah. That's not like overly priced, is it?
No, no, it was. I think it may have even come with it. I can't remember.
No, I think if it comes with it, that would be pretty good.
And just the whole thing is just really, really sort of neat, and it's really easy to sort of, to convert it. Like if you want to play as a handheld, it's super easy.
Yeah, what
if
is
you
it?
wanna...
Basically, it's like a little dock that you plug into your TV.
That just goes to the HDMI port on your TV, and then you just slide the switch in and out of it.
That's really cool.
It really is.
What the Joy-Con things, are they wireless or they have a long wire on them?
No, they're wireless.
Oh.
Totally wireless. So
yes, you could sit on your couch with your, with it on your TV and put it in your little sleeve and play it from there.
Yeah, and it upscales really nicely. Like when I have it plugged into the TV, I don't feel like you're getting any kind of graphical downgrade. It doesn't look, bad.
Yeah.
And obviously, you're playing Nintendo games anyway, so they're very cartoony and friendly to that sort of thing.
And that's another thing. Let's move into that for a second, that Nintendo feel.
Mm.
When you see a game that's kind of like, very cartoony, very fairy tale-y, it's like, oh, it's a Nintendo game.
Yeah.
Like Kirby.
Nah, I love Kirby.
They're games that you play and you're just kind of like, oh, I'm glad I'm playing this.
Well, that was the identity, and Nintendo sort of had it for a while, and then I think they kind of forgot it when they were just trying to compete with some of the other consoles.
Yeah.
During that period when they lost money, and then they found it again, and so much of that goes to Satoru Iwata.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He turned it around completely.
Because for a while there they were starting to consider even getting into like phone mobile gaming.
Oh, just doing like phone games?
Apps, just because they needed to make money, and
that may have been the end of Nintendo.
Well, that was what they sort of finally decided, that if they went that way, it would cease to be Nintendo.
Yeah.
And that was him. He was president at that point.
And look at them now.
Yeah,
they're back.
Yeah,
I think actually, I'm gonna correct my statement. I shouldn't say they're back. They never really left.
No, but I think it was almost like they went through this sort of awkward teen phase of experimenting with all these sort of different things. And
it's like, all right, it's out of our system. We know what we have to do.
Yeah, and then they sort of realized that, what they really are great at is handhelds.
Yeah.
And family games, like fun games that anybody can pick up and play.
Exactly. They are the kings of it, and they should not divert from it, and I don't think they're going to.
No, I think that, this really feels now like they've just solidified, who they are, where they're going, and you're just going to sort of see the continuation of the Switch or Switch-like consoles from them from now on.
Yeah. And I should point out, we're not kissing up to Nintendo in some ploy to get a sponsorship or anything like that. This is just how we really feel.
I don't need it. I already got all my Nintendo products.
Well, no, but you know what I mean. It's like...
Yeah.
As the BBC would say, and now the countering point of view, but there really isn't one. This is just, for us as fans of video gaming and what it's done for us from childhood on, we have everything to thank Nintendo for.
Because as when I sort of started to look back on, my experiences with video games, with consoles and stuff, you sort of start to realize how much of it was dominated by Nintendo.
Yeah.
And you didn't really think of it at the time.
Yeah, it's like, there was the Sega Saturn out there, but who do you know that was going over to, like, hey, my buddy just got the Sega Saturn, we're heading over there.
Yeah, again and again, it was just like, oh yeah, that was Nintendo. Oh yeah, that was Nintendo. Oh yeah, that was Nintendo.
Exactly. They dominated it for so long, and then they kind of didn't really fall by the wayside, but they took a step back because there was new, bigger guys in there.
Yeah,
But
and
they never
everybody
really
kind
left.
of rushed.
They were always
Yeah,
there.
and everybody kind of rushed off to the other guys too. Like some of it was Nintendo, but some of it was also us, right? We kind of went. It kind of
I'll
felt
admit
like
I did it.
I'm.
I definitely
Yeah,
did
I'm.
it. I was, I was wound in by the Game of the Year Combat Evolved thing.
Yeah, and that's competition and it's fine. But yeah, I mean, some of it was just all of us being like, oh, I'm too old for for Nintendo. That's for
Right.
kids.
Yeah, but now that you probably played with the Switch recently,
Yeah.
like, kind of wish I wouldn't have done that.
Well, yeah, and obviously, I mean, I bought the DS pretty much practically as soon as Hunter was old enough for it. I mean, I was really excited to get him into Nintendo products, which I think is always
Exactly.
kind of the sign, like, the people who grow up with something and want to get their kids into it.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you should mention that, because a while ago, did you ever see those? They were kind of like a console, but they had the 3 different cartridge ports at the top, and you could plug in the different cartridges for different old systems.
Yeah.
It was like the Universal one. They had the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo and the Genesis.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in a store talking to the guy about a game, and this guy, probably about my age, maybe a little older, brings his kid in there, and he's pointing it out to him, and he's explaining it to him, and he's like, why would I have to blow into the cartridge to make it work? Shouldn't it work? It's like, you just didn't get it unless you grew up with it.
Exactly. I think the sales of the mini versions of them is sort of proof of how beloved they are too.
They are an institution, a beloved institution in the video game world.
The thing I also appreciate about Nintendo is the quality. There's such a different sort of ethos between like Western video game developers and console developers and Eastern ones.
I think sometimes you have to look at some of the games that have been put out, especially lately, and you have to stop and wonder if somebody down the line said, that's good enough.
Yeah, like when you buy Nintendo, whether that's, a console or a game or whatever, like, it is going to work. It's going to work for years. It will not have, like, almost any bugs. Like, I have never had a single issue with freezing, with bugs.
I was actually going to ask you that. Think back, because we all remember the stories about how, the Xbox or the PlayStation was rushed out so it could be out in time for Christmas, and everybody's system bricked.
Yeah.
The red ring of death and this and that. When was the last time you heard about Nintendo having one of them?
I never, honestly.
I don't think I ever did. There was never one incident when a new Nintendo console came out, and within a week people were talking about the fact that it could brick, it's not going to work, it's going to overheat and explode.
Yeah, and same for like all of their games. I've never had an issue with like with cartridges not working or stopping working. Like, everything just works.
Yeah, it worked perfectly the first time, and it continued to work perfectly unless you did something to it.
Exactly, and I think
it wasn't going to wear out. It was going to be you doing something.
Exactly, and as time goes on and so much of, sort of a lot of practices of game developers and console manufacturers become really consumer unfriendly, you just appreciate it more and more,
And I think another thing is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I don't think they've ever really gone for the blatant cash grab of the microtransaction.
Not that I've seen,
I mean, they probably do to a degree, but not to the degree that, like, Xbox and PlayStation are doing.
No, because so many other games just, I'm not sure kind of like where that would even fit in with the games they have. It's not sort of part of their thing. I've always felt like I've gotten more than my money's worth when I buy Nintendo things.
I think so.
You
Because
know,
they're
and
just a good company all around, and that's why we decided to make this episode, because we really like them. We have a lot of very good memories with them, and we hope they're going to be around forever.
yeah, I'm excited to see where, like where does the Switch go or
Right. I'm
comes
curious
next.
too. Like, what's next? Because that was the one thing you would always say about Nintendo. Like, yeah, you knew the other consoles were going to advance, but you never said, "Ooh, wonder what Xbox is going to do." It was always, "Wonder what Nintendo's going to do."
Yeah,
Because they were the forefront.
so it'll be, especially with, the unfortunate passing of Iwata now. So, under different sort of management and where is it going to go now?
Hopefully, just continue on the path they're on.
I think so, and I certainly hope so.
Yeah. Well, what would you like to say as a parting thought to anybody that is still on the fence about Nintendo?
I'd say go for it. I mean, especially if you could find like a cheap DS. I think the DS still holds up, in terms of like game enjoyability.
Yeah, or even try out the Switch.
Yeah, I think it's worth the money, especially if you have, younger kids or if you just like kind of just more relaxing games,
Like Pokemon.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Like
Just
Animal Crossing. What else do you have on that thing?
Oh god, Animal Crossing, yeah, Pokemon, god, I just had a few others on there.
You got a Zelda game.
Yeah. I mean,
you're
not going to play Mortal Kombat on the Switch,
No,
but
the fact that you had Pokemon and all the subsequent download packages,
yeah.
That right there was worth the money, probably.
Yeah, definitely. So just, yeah, I mean, either or, I think both are great.
Exactly. So on that one, I think we're going to wrap this one up, because it's not always going to be about negativity here in CNC consoles and computers. Sometimes we do have very fond memories of gaming, and this was one of them. And thanks for coming along on the ride. So for the Carnival and CNC, I'm Zach.
I'm Rye.
Catch you next time, and continue to play them games.